Hey, what's up, Zoology? You thought that class Cestoda was nasty? Here we go with the nematodes. Actually, I think tapeworms are probably the grossest, but whatever. So section 2 of this worm unit is on phylum Nematoda. So N-E-M-A, Nema, and then Toda. And we call them nematodes sometimes. You'll notice that's a lot, phylum Mollusca or mollusks, Echinodermata or echinoderms, Cnidaria, Cnidarians. So we kind of just convert it into a adjective, essentially. So these are the roundworms. And they're roundworms because they're round. And they all kind of share a very similar body shape. So let's start getting into that a little bit. But let's start with a little bit about their kind of characteristics, all right? So nematodes are bilaterally symmetrical, just like the flatworms. So going past the cnidarians, moving into the worms, bilateral symmetry evolved. So we do have bilateral symmetry in all of the worms. Nematodes have a strong exterior covering called a cuticle. So it's kind of like, you know how a tomato is, where the inside is soft and then the outside has a harder surface? I guess pretty much any fruit or vegetable. It's kind of like that. So it's part of the nematode, but it is essentially kind of just a very firm and rigid exterior. It's similar to kind of like an apple peel in its texture. Nematodes are pseudocoelomates. So what that means, of course, is we have the gut at the center, and then on the exterior, we have those are the same color. Let's try that again. So in the middle, we have the endoderm, which is the gut. And then on the outside, we have the ectoderm. So in the middle, we have the gut. Oops. In the middle, we have the gut. That's the endoderm. And then on the outside, we have the ectoderm. And coelomates have a mesoderm, but the mesoderm is going to be used differently. So anything that is above the flatworms has some sort of mesoderm. Flatworms have a mesoderm that completely fills their internal cavity. So while they have a mesoderm, they don't have a coelom cavity, so they're acoelomates. The markers that don't work, that's cute. The nematodes, however, are pseudocoelomates. And so in this diagram, the blue represents the mesoderm. So the mesoderm is in there, and it has been created as one of the dermal layers during gastrulation, but it only is found on the inside of the outer cavity. So in here, we have pretty much just an open, fluid-filled area, and then the gut runs down the center of it. So the gut is still enclosed, and it runs down the center, but they do have a pseudocoelom. So they essentially have kind of a half coelom. So it's a coelom on the outside, just on the inside of the skin, but it's not on the inside. They are the first organisms we see that have a complete digestive tract. So in the flatworms, they had the pharynx, which is where their mouth and anus were. It's the same opening, so they take in and out, same opening. The roundworms, phylum Nematoda, are the first organisms to have a complete digestive tract. So it starts at the mouth, goes all the way through to the anus. They have a very simple nervous system. They have a hydrostatic skeleton. Basically, they don't have any sort of structural component inside, but they do keep a lot of water inside in that pseudocoelom, and that keeps them rigid. They have specialized excretory cells we'll talk about. They're similar to flame cells, but better. And they use longitudinal muscle contractions. And longitudinal muscle contractions we'll talk about more when we get to the annelids because they're more visible. But for now, we just throw it out there. So nematodes are some of the most common organisms on the planet. They are unbelievably abundant. If you have a single rotting apple, you can have 90,000 nematodes in there, and most of which are not visible to the eye until they get to be enough of them that they become a blob of nematodes. So right now we know of 25,000 species approximately, but we are estimating that there are probably, based on the fact that we have not tested the soil on every part of the world, probably about 500,000 species. So nematodes are extremely diverse. So they are very, very specialized, and they're very good at what they do. So nematode reproduction, right out of the back, talking 6, okay? So nematodes are the first organisms that are not hermaphroditic. So what that means is that they are dioecious. One organism or one type creates the male sex cells, one type creates the female. They have to come into contact with each other in order to do that. So the flatworms are hermaphroditic, and the next phylum kind of is too, but this is one phylum that is not. They have to come together to have sex. Fertilization is internal, so the male actually has it's called a spicule, but it's basically just like a barb that is used to essentially open the female reproductive tract and fertilize. We'll just leave it at that, okay? We don't need to go into more details than that. So basically, they have sex. The end. Nematode ecology, many of them are free-living, and they are decomposers, extremely important decomposers. A lot of them, however, are parasitic, and some are specialized to live... Some are specialized to live only in certain areas. So there is one type of nematode, a species of nematode that is found only around beer. And so they are found in beer mats, coasters, things like that. And so they kind of thrive off of that. So any of those materials that are reused, they do that. Some are parasitic and they live inside of humans, but they specialize in certain areas. This image down here is an example of a situation where nematodes have kind of filled the vein going out of a leg and have essentially blocked it off. And so a lot of the blood kind of pools in the leg. And so they're pretty nasty. Nematodes are not very kind to people. And this picture in particular stresses me out. We're going to skip that video. So instead of actually going into the classes of nematodes, because there are too many and they are changing right now, we're going to just kind of mention a few of the common ones. So we don't need to memorize their names, but we want to talk about kind of how they work. So this particular one is an intestinal parasite in Americans, and so, or in humans. And in certain areas of the country, up to 25% of the people have this parasite. Okay. And about 1.27 billion people around the world have it. So it is relatively common, and which is upsetting. Females lay about 200,000 eggs per day, and they pass out with the feces. And then if the feces pass into soil, then they can pass on to other animals, etc. And so they are able to stay in the soil. They can go into plants and then get consumed. And they're extremely dangerous because they can actually perforate the intestinal wall and cause internal bleeding. So, yeah, okay. So hookworms, it just keeps getting better. Hookworms have large plates around their mouth that they actually use to grab onto the intestinal wall and suck blood. They are very, very small. Nematodes primarily are really small. So this is a matchstick, and you can see that the nematodes are pretty small comparatively. They live in the intestines of humans and other animals. And again, the eggs pass out with the feces. And if you get near hookworms, like in a water, like a contaminated body of water or something like that, they can actually pass through the skin, get into the bloodstream, and then make their way to the intestines. They can also get into the lungs, and so they're not great. And then we have the Trichina worm. This causes trichinosis, and so a lot of people have heard of trichinosis. It's a pretty severe infection. And this is what we get if we eat undercooked pork. So this is a particular parasite that comes from undercooked meat, and it matures in the intestines, and then juveniles, kind of the babies, will penetrate into the intestinal wall, move into the bloodstream, then go all over the body. And this is actually one type of worm that actually causes death pretty frequently. So it's a pretty nasty one. And then the last one that we're going to look at is the pinworm. This is the most common parasite we see in the United States. We're not going to go too much into the details of it, but you can read what happens there, okay? But pinworms are something that can pass around to people very easily through contaminated clothing, through contaminated sheets, etc. So they also can pass through air particles. So pinworms are pretty common. As sad as it is, they're pretty common. So let's end our journey of nematodes there. So going back to the beginning, we want to hit on kind of that big stuff for nematodes. So they are the first group that are pseudocoelomates. They have a complete digestive tract and a simple nervous system. And go ahead and answer the questions you have in your packet, and I will see you in next class. We're going to be trying to do an activity with nematodes, so get excited. Not pinworms, don't worry. Okay, bye.